Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is entitled Coaching Software Testers, and today's presenter is Anne-Marie Charrett. If you have any questions for Anne-Marie, please type them into the questions field on your control panel, and I will address these questions to Anne-Marie at the end of the webinar. You can type questions at any point throughout the webinar, and I will then ask these directly to Anne-Marie at the Q&A session after the webinar. The presentation slides, as well as a recording of the webinar, will be available on the EuroSTAR website after the webinar. And you can join the conversation on Twitter at #ESConfs, and you can connect with us at @ESConfs, and you can also connect with today's presenter Anne-Marie Charrett at @Charrett. So now, without further ado, let me hand you over to today's presenter, Anne-Marie. Hello, Anne-Marie.
Hi, Dara. How are you? Good.
Good.
Okay, welcome everyone. Today, as Dara mentioned, we're going to be talking about coaching software testers, and this is a topic dear to my heart. But first, let me introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. I've studied electronic engineering at university, and I like to think that software testing chose me when I started testing protocols for ETSI standards in Dublin in Ireland. And I've been software testing ever since, and I've tried many various forms of software testing. I've been a test lead and a test manager, and I do test consulting, and I'm training and coaching at the moment. One of the things that really struck me as a test manager that I struggled with was that, to me, and this is talking about 15 years ago, I think quite a few things have changed since then, is that there was a lot of paperwork involved around test management. It was a lot about reporting, about doing weekly reports, about a lot about talking to stakeholders, but there was very little about helping the testers upskill themselves. And I felt quite disillusioned with test management at that time. And it was only when I discovered coaching and I started working with James Bach on coaching that I realized that there are ways that we can help testers transform themselves. And suddenly this was opened my eyes to a whole new way I could help empower teams and help them empower themselves to help them to become better testers. And so really I've been focusing on this ever since. I mean, coaching is really ideal, I think, in a test management environment. We're all busy people, right? I mean, and we're deadline driven a lot of the time, and it's really hard to get testing done. Forget about actually how we do the testing. Actually, to get the testing done before the deadline is a challenge in itself. But we have to balance that, don't we? As test managers and as testers, we have to balance that with the getting better at testing. But it's hard to get training, even for ourselves, let alone our teams. So I think this is why coaching in a team environment is a fantastic opportunity, because the coaching gives us the breathing space, that we need to help us to test better, to help us to explore, to learn to inquire. Now, there's lots of different types of coaching, of course. You're talking about coaching in sport. We've got personal coaches telling you how to manage your life, and there's the agile coaching. So I just want to differentiate a little bit from these. Because what I'm looking at, the coaching, the testers that I do, is a systematic approach to improving testing skill. I do a lot of this online, but more and more I'm doing face-to-face. If I compare it to, say, life coaching, it's different than that, because the coaching, the testers that I do, really requires some element of knowledge for the coach to have about testing. Whereas if in a life coach, it doesn't necessarily involve them to have knowledge in that person's personal life or whatever. They ask more, it's more of a questioning process, but they don't necessarily have to be skilled in that area. The coaching that I advocate and that James Bach and I have been working at looks at having a tester who is able to help another tester to become better at testing. And to do that, right, you need to have some idea of what testing is about. So that's in a nutshell sort of what the coaching high level. Now the reason why I gave this webinar today was because of good old Twitter. We love Twitter. And thanks to Matt Heuser, Matt wanted some theory and examples and exercises in this webinar. Now that's all in 40 minutes, might be a bit of a stretch. So what I'm going to give you is some theories and some examples. The exercises, unfortunately, I tried to do a bit of this the last time I gave a webinar, and it's quite challenging to do. So I'm afraid if you want to get some exercises, you'll just have to ping me on Skype or something, and I can give you a coaching session so you get an idea of what we're talking about. Okay, so a little bit of background about how James and I went about creating this coaching model. For a start, this is very much an experience-based model. We made this model by coaching testers one at a time. And as we coached testers, we observed what the students were doing, and we observed how we coached. And then we started observing how other students were coaching other people. And then we started evaluating the transcripts. We started reading and assessing the transcripts to get an idea of patterns that were emerging. And then we'd meet together and we'd review the model and we'd refine it and update it. And pretty much this has been going on for about 4 years now. We've always based the coaching model on a Socratic method. And the Socratic method asks questions so the tester is able to discover the answer by themselves. And this really facilitates the tester's own learning, and they can base their learning on their own values and their own perspective. So it's a really powerful way for a tester to start learning because it's based on their core model. So we evaluated the coaches, we identified patterns, and then we tested these patterns on by doing some more coaching. So, and that in a nutshell is what we've been doing. And so we came out with this wonderful coaching space. Now, this is the 2011 model, and we came out with this coaching model, and you can see here that central to the whole concept of the coaching space is this wonderful energy. Now, this is energy is not the mystical, magical force or something like that. It's really just a person's level of motivation. This is a concept that Jerry Weinberg talks a lot about following the energy and identifying a person's level of motivation. To have positive energy or positive motivation gives us an idea that the person's willing to change, right? That the person is open to learning more. And maybe a negative motivation would be someone who's trying to protect themselves or protect an idea or a process or an institution or something like that. And then we've got down below the energy, we've got the task. Now, the task is really important in the coaching that I do because it helps the coach and the student tap into a common model, and the student is able to perform a task, and the coach is able to see what that task is. Then you'll see beside you've got these funny little curves, and they're the media, and it's there because to remind us as coaches that media often distorts. So, you know, if we're doing online or remote coaching or even by email, that the media can often distort what we're saying, and people might get different impressions of what we mean, or we might get different impressions of what the student is meaning from their words. And then you've got the coach on the left and the student, and we've got these wonderful little bubbles all down the side, and these are the attributes that both the coach and the student have. You'll notice that it's mirrored, right? And these are all the different attributes that we want to look at and want to be aware of, and that will impact our coaching, the coaching as we do the coaching. So we were pretty proud of this model, but we got together and we thought we could do better, and so hot off the press, I can now introduce you to the Coaching Space 2013. And you can see here that there's a slight change. We've put the energy really to the center, and behind that energy you can see that there's a trust. And we realized this when we were giving the coaching workshop in Brighton this year. We realized that that trust is central to the energy, and that we need to have good energy to generate trust, and that we should try and build trust up with each interaction to maintain energy. So we realized that trust is really important in a coaching space, so we put that in. We also looked at the energy and what it means. We had this term, this pattern that we were using called follow the energy. But really, what exactly did that mean? So we looked into that a bit more, and now we came up with this idea of reading the energy, that we need to be able to read the energy as we coach, but we also need to manage it, right? We also need to be able to motivate people or challenge people a bit more, and then realize when we want to take off that pressure and relax a bit. And so we need to be reading that energy constantly as we have a coaching session. Above the energy, we have the direction. Now the direction this is like the method of our coaching, right? This is the crux, the core of what we do when we actually coach testers. So you can see we assign the task. So the task is still there. It's still really important. But then we started to describe, well, what do we actually do here? So we give a student a task, and then we observe what they do. And we start to explore and evaluate what's happening. Now there's two things that can happen here. We can have it can be a positive reaction. They could do something that's really, really good. Okay, and so if a student does something that we want to highlight, we want to highlight that achievement. We want to analyze it and show them and support them about what they did well there. And we praise them on this, and we show them. Sometimes one way of doing this is showing them how they could have done it badly, and that elevates what they have done well. But we don't want to ignore if things have gone, if there is a problem. Our job as coaches is to help a student identify that problem. So we help the student explore what's happening around there and challenge them and question them to help them understand. And then we understand the problem, and then we help them to develop and explain, you know, what other ways can we think about this. So we've got the direction right above the energy. The observations, really they're what comes out of the task. So all the things that a student does, all the mistakes, or you know, what they talk about, how they react, the heuristics they might use, the tools they might use in order to complete a task. All these different things are what we as coaches need to observe in order to be able to analyze the student's ability and all these different attributes. So we think that this is a much more refined and better model for us. But with any model, there's challenges with coaching, and over the years, you know, I've noticed that especially when we're starting to coach, especially one of the things when I was starting to coach was that it was quite challenging to manage all these things. We've got all these things I need to think about. I need to focus on the attributes and the task, and I've got to make the task, and then I've got to direct, and then I've got to manage this energy thing. How am I going to manage that energy? You know, when do I actually push, and when do I relax, and how do I know if I'm pointing at the right problem? And it's quite an art to balance or juggle these balls all at the same time, and trying to help the student at the same time, right? So there's a lot of balls to juggle there, and as we were coaching, and as we started recognizing that, hang on a second, there are these patterns that are emerging, these coaching syndromes, things that coaches do, and things that students do that are becoming more and more common and becoming more apparent. So I'm going to have a look at some of these. Some of the student actions, so the actions that the student does when they start performing their task. And some of these actions, we notice that the student would behave in a certain way. And we noticed that also to that behavior, a coach often reacted to that and by performing a different reaction. So we had these student actions, and then we had these, or student triggers as we call them sometimes, and then we have these coaching actions that help the student when the student performs some type of behavior. And then again we notice the coaching syndromes, where these common patterns that coaches do and that students do. Some of the student syndromes that that have become common is, I've noticed some of these as we've gone along. Very much one of the things I see in junior testers is, or testers who do a lot of scripted testing, is a shallowness and a lack of understanding terminology and what software testing really means. We also have also those types of testers and find it difficult sometimes to explain or justify why they do things. So it's this, if you have a tester who's used to accepting why the way things are done and doesn't really question why they're doing something, so for example if they're following a process or they're following test scripts without thought, then sometimes they'll find it really hard to explain why they're doing something. Having little imagination to be able to think laterally, and you know, as testers, especially those with a bit of experience, will realize that, you know, in order to be able to come up with new ideas, we need to think laterally. We need to think of alternatives, and that can be very, very challenging for some testers to do that. And so one of the syndromes that has been emerging is this lack of imagination to think of new ideas. Missing knowledge. I mean, if it's a young tester, you know, young testers who have never tested before are going to have a lot of missing knowledge. And for experienced testers, it can be that there's the systematic approach is missing. So they're very good at doing testing. They know what to do, but they don't have a systematic approach. They can't explain what they're doing. So, and then of course we have coaching syndromes. I am familiar with many of these very fondly. I started off as a wandering shepherdess, and a wandering shepherd or shepherdess is a coach who really has no clear idea of what to do in a coaching session. They start off coaching, but they have no clear frame in their mind of where they're going with the session. So they're asking questions, but they're not sure about where they want to direct. So they're trying to follow the energy, they're trying to manage all these things, but you know, it's as I said, it's quite hard to juggle all these balls in the air and to keep the actual coaching session focused can be quite a challenge. And so you get the symptom or the syndrome where you have this coach who's not having a huge amount of effect during the coaching session. Intemperance is a coach, happens when a coach really swings from extremes. So they start off and they know they need to apply pressure, right? And so they're desperate, they're trying to apply pressure, but in applying the pressure, they're applying way too much pressure and they're overwhelming the student, and often the student loses confidence or gets confused or feels overwhelmed because there's just too much challenging going on. And so then the coach starts to realize this, and then in an attempt to counter that, swings right to the other end and then doesn't apply enough pressure. And so you have this swinging from side to side particularly with young coaches until they actually start understanding how to use pressure in a coaching session. Triple blindness is when a coach fails to recognize a problem or fails to of recognizes a small problem instead of like this big whopping big stop sign in front of them, they're not seeing the major problem. And this can be lack of testing knowledge, or it could be lack of coaching knowledge. Leaping to judgment, so that you're making calls without enough information. You're making snap decisions about what a student is doing or why a student is behaving in such a way without really having taken the time to really understand or build trust or follow the energy in a coaching session. And the last one I've added, I've added this one, it's a new one for me, but I think it's really important. And this is insincerity, because one of the biggest challenges I find is praising students when they don't do anything necessarily that well. I think in my effort to make a student feel good, I have this desire to say, great job, when they really haven't done anything that great. And I think this is really important to be aware of this, because if a coach does this, it destroys trust, because you know as a person, you know as a student that whether you deserve praise or not. And if somebody gives you false praise, it really invalidates any sincere praise done later. So I've noticed this in a pattern in myself, but also in other testers where we have the desire to keep things upbeat and give praise where it's not necessarily due. So just a few examples of some coaching syndromes that are out there. All right, I want to give you some examples of some coaching syndromes at play. Now, all these coaching sessions that I'm going to show you, I have got permission from the students to share this information. I pulled out some information just to make the transcripts clearer to see, so you're not seeing the full transcripts. And I've removed spelling mistakes and dates and things like that just to make it clearer. But the main gist of these coaching sessions are what's actually happened. So I'd like to introduce you to Rika. Now, Rika had, when I was coaching her, which was a while ago, she had 3 years of testing experience. She'd recently moved job. I'm not convinced she was totally happy about her new role, but she wanted to keep her skills up to date. And so I coached her a couple of times. One was on the topic of oracles, and then we got in to the topic of, what is testing and what are we supposed to do when we test. And the statement that Rika made was, as a tester, we're supposed to check if the software is working as expected. And I wanted to explore that with her a bit. So what I gave her was a calculator task. Now, some of you might be familiar with this. It's a exercise that James Bach gave me, and you basically ask someone to see a calculator, and that you enter 2 plus 2, and you ask the student, what do you expect to see? And so you expect to respond, okay, I see 4, and they humor you, oh yes, I see 4. And so you expect a 4 and you see a 4, and they go, yes, that's what I said. And so then you take them on to a situation where you ask them where you might expect a 4 and see a 4, and yet the answer is incorrect. Now, this can be quite a challenging question for someone who works in a very scripted process type environment, or is used to not thinking deeply about testing. I think this is a wonderful example here of shallow answers. Someone who has not thought deeply or complexly about what testing is really about. She basically has limited imagination. She says it will only be incorrect when I don't see 4. It's like there's no other way that this can be incorrect. And this is not unusual for many testers. I think many testers do struggle with this, to see alternative answers or alternative dimensions to how something may be incorrect when you're focused on something being correct. So I give her an answer, and I give her, an idea. If I smelled smoke, would this be a problem? And she's like, yes. And so I ask her, well, what does this tell you? And then she goes and she starts giving me really short answers. Now, I actually think this, on hindsight, this is a coaching syndrome that I've done here. I've failed to recognize that Rika's energy has completely dropped, right? You notice her short answers. Notice how she's going to two-worded answers. She stopped responding in any way. And this could be a sign that her energy's dropped. She's really confused. She says she doesn't know. That could be that she has no idea what I'm talking about. But I do something different. I pile the pressure on. So I use an exclamation mark at the end of the sentence, but the answer matches the expected results. And I pile the pressure on to see what would happen. And Rika answers in a very shallow way, and she says, "Well, then there's no problem." I'm like, "What? Are you crazy? You're going to ship if there's smoke coming out the back of a calculator?" So I wanted to show you the example because to me it's a nice combination of coaching syndromes and student syndromes here in play, where both of us are struggling in some way to communicate effectively with the other person. The other thing is that it's a bit of an example of negative energy, right? Because you're looking at this, she's withdrawing her energy from it's becoming what was beforehand quite a positive environment is becoming less and less positive, and she's starting to protect this idea that you can only have the expected result has to match, and if we can't have problems outside of this. Okay, so then I want to talk to you a little bit about the student actions. We talked about how some things that students do that that coaches can look at and say, look, I can see something and this helps me identify that there might be a problem here. And just like we have the wandering shepherd or shepherdess, we also have a wandering lamb. Now, wandering lamb is really is a student who really just is all over the place when trying to answer questions through the coaching session. Typically, wandering lamb will be someone who's not used to thinking deeply or deeply about a problem at hand. They're not used to really questioning themselves and answering in a thoughtful or considered way. And so the answers that they give, that instead of trying to go deep, they start skipping along the top of the water in lots and lots of different directions. And so as a coach, you have to be aware that the student is doing this and aware of what patterns to apply if you have a wandering lamb. Same thing is with the shallow answer. As you saw with Rika, her answers became really short. This should have been alarm bells for me, right? To say, okay, well, hang on a second, something's not working here. Her energy's going down. Another typical thing often many students might do is to, in response to you trying to take them to a deeper level, is that they start asking for the answer. So rather than avoid the answer, they say, well, can you just tell me? Depending on the situation, depending on how much you know that student and you know that tester, there's two options here you can do. One is to tell them the answer. If they have tried really hard to answer and they really don't know and they're starting to get very frustrated, then you need to give them a direct answer here. But if somebody who really hasn't tried very hard, you can apply a pattern, say something like stonewalling, where you challenge the person to you repeat the question to get the person to really think about that and refuse to answer their question for them. The parroted response. Now this is something that you happen often if you ask a student to, say, define a term of something. Say you ask them to define a common term like what is risk-based testing, and then you get this silence from the other side, and then suddenly they come back and they copy and paste an answer, and you can pretty much guess that the person's gone off, maybe Googled it or done something like that, because once you start delving into what their response is, you start to discover they don't really have any idea what the response means. So that can be quite common, especially in online coaching, right? Now the scribbler is somebody who just writes a lot, and then you can see the little pen in Skype writing, and then it stops, and then it starts again, and then you get the eraser deleting it out, and then it starts writing again furiously, and then there's the pause. This could mean lots and lots of different things, right? It's very hard to actually read into what this actually means. But there could be that the student is really not very confident about what they're saying. It could be that they have high expectations of themselves and they want to get it exactly right. Or it could be that if there's a long pause that they've gone off and had gone off to get a cup of tea or something. So it's really hard to judge exactly what's going on. But sometimes this sort of information, it's just good to be aware of it as you go along, and it might help along with other patterns to help you identify some type of syndrome in that tester. And as with, we've got the coaching actions. So when we talked about defining your terms, right, I've just spoke about that briefly, where we have say if you've got a term like risk-based testing, it's a really good idea to get the student to explain what that term is. Before you go deep into a coaching session where you make the assumption that the tester and you are understanding the same thing. And we all know in software testing, so much of the terminology means different things to different people. So for me, a lot of the time, what I really like to do is to define, what exactly is software testing? Driving to detail is one of the biggest coaching patterns I use. And I use this a lot to help me identify exactly how a tester is thinking. So if they say something, I'll get them to be more and more specific. And as they get more and more specific about something, lots of information pops up and helps you identify if there's problems. It helps you identify if they're doing something really well too. So driving to detail is one of the biggest patterns, along with polarization. So polarization is where you're taking a statement to the extreme. So you might use terms like always or never in your statement. And the reason why you want to do that is because you want to extend how you want to see if a tester is able to understand the nuance in that statement. If you make an extreme statement about one thing, do they reject it, or do they agree with you, or do you go into a middle ground where you can understand where judgment is required? The boomerang is responding to a question by asking another question. And this is a very method that I use, in a Socratic method, to keep the pressure up and to add pressure to a coaching session. Now, bracketing is something that I use when I really, as I said, there's so much going on. I want to use it because I can see all these things popping up, right? And often as I'm coaching, it's not just one syndrome that you see, or not just one thing that you notice, but you start noticing lots and lots of things. And you might not want to address them all at the same time. But some of these things are really important. So you bracket them, you put them to one side, and you keep them there in order to be able to use them maybe at a later date. You don't want to distract the student. So I'd like to introduce you to another coaching session. This is Anu. Now, Anu's a tester who had never never tested before. She had a physics degree, had no IT background, and she contacted me because she wanted to become a tester. And I asked her, well, why do you want to become a tester? And she said that her husband worked in software web development, and he noticed that she had this uncanny ability of finding problems in his software. And so because of that, she thought that maybe that she could do this as a career. So when Anu approached me, one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to see, well, how does she test? I wanted to see her actually test something. And so I used the PARC calculator that some of you might be familiar with, the PARC Calc exercise, to see, and I asked her to test this for me. Now she started testing and she was racing through the system, and she was all over the place, right? She was finding bugs here and she was jumping over there, and I was having a real problem keeping up with her ideas. I wanted her to slow down and watch and to think about what she was doing. So what I did was I asked her to describe one test, right? So I asked her, said, can you describe me one test in detail? So here you can see this driving to detail pattern, right? I'm asking her to get specific. And she says, I'll select a lot, and then she describes what she's going to do. But this is not good. I want to see exactly what she's doing. Like this, to me, this is not specific. I don't know which lot she's going to choose. So I apply the pattern again. Which lot are you going to use? Okay, so she explains that. And then I continue. I want her to keep going. But then she starts wandering, right? She goes off to another link, and then she comes back, and then she starts off on a different economy. And I'm like, whoa, 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 hang on a second, hang on. She's wandering again, and I'm trying to draw her back and trying to get her to be more specific. It's clear that she doesn't understand what it means to run a test. And hey, look, she's never tested before. This is probably to be expected. You know, somebody who has had no formal training in testing and really has gone to websites and found bugs, it's not surprising that she has little idea of what a test is. And so what I do from this point on is I go on to explain. I go into what we call a lecture mode, and I go on to explain to her how testing requires you to configure, you need to operate, you need to observe, and you need to evaluate. And unless we have these four things we're not testing. And to be able to describe I want her to learn from an early start to describe what she's doing as she's testing. So this was just, to me, this was a great example of a classic wandering lamb action here, and how I've applied the coaching action, the coaching passion, driving to detail, to trying to get her to be more specific. Finally, I want to talk to you about Chris. Okay, so Chris is more of a recent coaching. Chris, if you're there, hi. Chris came to me recently. Now Chris has got a lot more coaching, a lot more testing experience. He wants to coach his testers in his team. He's a thoughtful tester. He realizes that applying large automated regression suites isn't necessarily the only way to use tools, and he wants to encourage his team to start thinking about how to apply tools in his team. He talks a little bit about confidence in his email about me, so I'm looking out a little bit for this to see if he's appearing confident or not. But before I actually help Chris in his coaching, I want to see him test, and this is going back to the basic. I want to understand how Chris tests before I can help him coach. Now the benefit of this for Chris is that he gets to see me coach, right? So he's watching how I'm coaching. So before even that I help him in becoming a coach, he's already starting to get an idea of what it means to coach testers. All right, so I give him a SCAPA. This is another website on game, and I ask him for this to find the 3 most important bugs. So you can see I'm applying a task here. Here's the task. And I just love his answer, right? Because he gives this answer, he says, but important to who, right? And so this is a fantastic, so this is clearly a tester who understands the importance of the relativity of what important means. And I want to praise it. This is fantastic for a tester to come and say this. It's thoughtful. Watch all the amount of language he's using here. You know, when you think about a shallow answer, this is the exact opposite. This is a detailed, thoughtful answer. He's provided an example here to describe what he means, and it's rich and it's open, and he's providing. He's not stopping himself or preventing himself from giving information. He's incredibly forthcoming in how he feels and what he thinks about things. And so it's a great example of some positive energy. And then he goes on to ask about definitions of, you know, is there definitions of who the users are? Now, I'm looking at this, I'm like, I don't really want to go into this just yet. So this is where I'm going to park this for a bit, because I want to think about this, and maybe one of the future coaching sessions we can go back into more about what requirements and whether we need to use the requirements in coaching, in testing, and what would happen if we didn't have requirements. But I can't resist myself a little bit, so I do ask, so in order to test you need to have explicit requirements, all right? So I've taken his idea and I've made it extreme. So this is an example of polarization in a coaching session, and it's quite a pressuring, pressuring pattern. It exerts quite a bit of pressure onto a student. But Chris handles this beautifully, and he says yes and no. What a great answer, because really he's gone straight to the gray. He's not acknowledging, he's not disagreeing or agreeing with the statement, but he's disagreeing and agreeing. And you know, he looks at this and he says, you know, having them allows me to focus on what was important to someone. Now, I think that's good, but I'm thinking, okay, well, hang on a second, that's great thinking, but what happens, you know, is this the only way to test? What about, you know, can focusing on requirements like this actually hinder your testing? And so this is something that I'm going to bracket for a while, because I don't want to introduce a new idea or a new concept at this point. One of the key things I do when I'm coaching somebody for the first time is I really want to look at their energy when they coach. And so we continue testing and coaching, and Chris comes up with this idea about, you know, he starts talking about the bugs that he finds, and he's handling the task, and then he goes, I'd love to know what happens when you get after 18 seconds. Now, this is great. This is fantastic, because it's a natural segue into testability. And I want to see how does Chris handle thinking about different ways to test something, because it's challenging for this game to get past 18 seconds. You can't, it's very difficult to play this game to 18 seconds, as any of you who've tried it out will know. So you've got to think of an alternative way to get to 18 seconds. And Chris comes up straight away. I mean, it was just like that. He came back and he's like, I could reduce the size of the square. Now, no one's actually ever suggested this to me. I've played this game, I've asked this question many times. Some people suggest slowing down the speed of the boxes, but reducing the size of the square? I was like, wow, this is amazing, this is fantastic. And so this is where, you know, we talked in that model where we have the direction. I really want to focus on this positive. This is great stuff. This is wonderful. And look how Chris reacts to this. He starts coming up with other ideas as well. And the energy here is really high at the moment. And he's positive. And I want to reinforce that, you know, because really the goal of all of this coaching is for the tester to be to feel motivated and inspired to go out and learn and inquire more by themselves. And so we're at high energy coaching here. So that was Chris. And that's where he was. I really liked this because what happened with Chris at the end was that he started talking about, went on Twitter. And to me, this is the goal of coaching, right? This is the goal. Having someone like Chris is a real pleasure to coach because, you know, it's just really easy to help him be inspired. He inspired himself. He does all the thinking. I was more like a guide for him. And to me, this is what coaching is all about. It's about helping people to inspire themselves to go out and improve their testing skill. So that's what my short little webinar is about. I think we have some time for questions. I'd like to thank you very much for listening, and again, if you want any assistance on coaching, please Skype me on Charrett's, but please put in something to say that it's about coaching because I'm getting heaps of coach bots or whatever contacting me on Skype and asking me, wanting me to make $1 million in 5 minutes or something like that. So if you could just put the word coaching in when you ping me, that'd be really grateful so I know that I can accept your request without getting spammed. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, for that webinar. We're now going to open the floor to your questions, so if you have any questions for Anne-Marie, please just type them into the questions field. And while you're typing the questions, let me just bring your attention to our webinar archive. Here you can get access to almost 50 on-demand software testing webinars. If you join the EuroSTAR community, you can get access to over 600 software presentations, 50 topical webinars, over 40 videos, podcasts, ebooks, and more. This year's conference is taking place in the Swedish Exhibition and Congress Center in Gothenburg, Sweden, from the 4th to the 7th of November, so we hope to see you there. And finally, from now up until May 31st, you can avail of the Super Early Bird discount ticket, which will save you up to €430. And you can make even bigger savings when you register for the group discount, where every 5th attendee goes free. So now we will just have a look at some of your questions that you have for Anne-Marie. So the first question I have here, if you bear with me 1 second. The first question I have is from Stephen Blower. I find the biggest barrier when coaching testers is to not create an artificial barrier between you and the tester, whereby they deal with it negatively and feel you're actually testing them, not working together collaboratively. How do you overcome this aspect?
Okay, I'm not too sure what you mean by the barrier, but if what I can say is that it goes back to this whole concept of following the energy. And really, if I go into a coaching session, it's all about the student. It's not about me. It's about helping that tester. And one of the first questions I ask a tester is, you know, what do you want to learn? And that goes straight to the energy, right? You're going straight to the motivation. And if you can tap into what motivates them and help them and maybe explain that's the purpose of your coaching, maybe that will help overcome part of that barrier.
The next question I have is from Andre Contan. What is your experience with students without technical background and want to start a testing career?
Okay, now this is an interesting question because I'm going to answer this partly with, because I am coaching some students who don't have a huge technical background. And one of the things, just like Anu, is that many of these testers will have a fear of complexity, fear of technology. And what you want to do with these testers is you want to help inspire them. You want to help them overcome these hurdles. You know, anyone, really, if you can understand mathematics, you can understand technology, you can understand HTML, but you need to overcome that fear. And you do that by lowering, the expectations. Where we had in that bubble, we had the attributes. You've got aspirations and expectations there. Now, for someone who's not very experienced technically, they're going to have some aspirations if that's what they want to do. They have aspirations to be there. Their expectations probably need to be quite low. And so you need to start really low with a tester like that and slowly and gradually build up their expectations of what they can do.
Question I have is from a Raj Mathur. How does one know whether he or she is putting on too much pressure?
Yes, that's a very good question, and it can be a real challenge, and it's one that you see a lot of young testers or inexperienced coaches, doing. I mean, I myself, I struggled with doing this, and even in, you see that example I gave of Richa where I was piling on the pressure. Really, maybe on hindsight, it would have been better to notice that her energy had dropped and it was time to release and relax the pressure and to find out where she was at. Now, the benefit of coaching online and using transcripts is that I can go back and evaluate these transcripts, right? And I can start learning and recognizing, okay, I made a mistake there. And gradually through practice, through evaluation and observation evaluation, I can start to improve on that, and I can learn to notice when to drop, when to alleviate the pressure.
The next question is from John Paul Varwick. Wandering Shepherd addresses the direction of your coaching. How do you know which direction to choose, especially when you don't know the person you are coaching?
Yeah, look, it can be really tough, and I think it's going back to tapping into their motivation, and if you can tap into what they really want to do, the chances are that they will not wander as much. So I suppose that's one thing, but sometimes you just really need to keep bringing back that person to using the driving to detail, bringing them back again constantly. There's other patterns that we use to help a student come back. I mentioned stonewalling, I think, and that's when you repeat or return a request without softening or modifying it, right? So you want to maintain the difficulty of the request, but you want to refocus the student. Some students just do not want to get more complex about things, and you can't force anyone to want to do that. I mean, I think maybe it's not the time for them to be coaching this. Maybe they're not ready to handle that particular topic. Or maybe they're not ready to handle that particular fear. I mean, one of the things that you have a syndrome is that some people actually don't want to be testers, right? I mean, there's not a lot you can do in that situation.
The next question I have is from Sak Kular. Does mentoring and coaching mean the same thing?
Oh no, I don't think so, because I think mentoring for me, mentoring is, when I was mentored anyway, what I would do is there was somebody there who was more senior to me, so I guess in those regards that can be simpler, though in coaching you don't necessarily have to have a senior person, you can have a peer-to-peer relationship. But when I was being mentored, I had someone senior to me, but I would just go, if I had a question, I'd just ask them a question, and then they would give me the answer, and I'd go off and do that. There was very little direction in what I was doing. It was purely, off my own bat. So I think the coaching that James and I do is a lot more directional and a lot more focused. If you think about what we're doing with the energy there, we're managing that energy, and I don't think I have a recollection of ever feeling being managed as a mentoree, but maybe they just were great mentors. But certainly I see a distinction there.
Question is from Oleska van der Lutskaveneski. Apologize for pronouncing your name wrong there. Would you recommend any books for coaches so we can learn how to ask the right questions and what to expect from the answers?
Oh, well, you have to wait for the books James Bach and I am writing, and then we'll be able to have all the answers you possibly want. But right now, I don't think there's a lot in there specific to the model we're doing, because it's focused on testing, right? And in order to do the coaching that we do, you really need to have a testing model. So, you know, and because of that, you know, a lot of the coaching books out there are talk on a higher level about, you know, questioning or how to question, but it doesn't necessarily focus on testing specifically. But you could start looking at books on Socratic method, definitely, or things like that to help you understand what the Socratic method are. That might help you.
Okay, we've kind of gone over the hour mark there, so we'll take just one last question. And this question is from a Somaya Or. Can overconfidence be also considered as student action?
Oh gosh, I'm not quite sure. Let me have a think about that. A student action. Well, I would see it more as a syndrome, because maybe what a student does is they don't feel, they might give a shallow answer because they don't feel they need to explain, or they don't feel that they need to justify what they're doing, in which case that would be more the action than the syndrome. But I can't quite see a syndrome being an action in that way.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. I just want to thank Anne-Marie for today's webinar. And we'd also like to thank all of our attendees for attending. And the webinar is now over. So take care, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.